Hi, you're watching a very specially recorded session of Agenda AWANI right here at the World Economic Forum 2020, and this is the 50th year of WEF at Davos, and Professor Klaus Schwab has said that he is looking at the next 50 years of WEF. So I'm here, a little tiny journalist trying to bring some voices into the mix at Davos, and of course bringing back a lot more voices from here to Malaysia. And at the Media Village, there's always a room for a press conference, but there's also an issue briefing room. And in that room, on the issue of executive pay, I met a very important professor, and the professor is from Columbia Law School, and she is Katharina Pistor. Thank you so much, Prof, for making time.
Thank you for having me.
But you wear many hats, you know. You head a center, and you write, and you're an author in Davos. Through some sessions and through sitting down and listening to you in your session, that in that discussion, it isn't as easy as that. A lot of people think like that's like taking paracetamol and aspirin. If you have a headache, and the headache will go away. But now we're learning there's an institutional approach. There's the implementation of it. There's the laws written from many years ago, and then there's the the history of court cases in the courts. But if I just take out the market forces and the laws governing them, because in my country, for your information, the last 12 months has seen 4 physical newspapers being closed down. And there's hardly a direct set of laws to govern big tech or big technology companies that comes into our market and into our society. So fact shows that they took away 60 to 80% of the revenue of the media industry in my country, and the local media is just fighting over 20 to 30%, and there's no taxation much directly on the big tech. So this is why I'm going to come to you, because I'm going to read your book, but I've been stealing express ways of looking at other people's comment. How do we approach this from the rule of law to make society more just, to make the market more looking at justice rather than not? Because as it is, even though we have changed political leadership, the odds of change is still tough for the rule of law.
Yeah. So let me say a word about the rule of law, what we really, how we can think about this. So I think about law being an important social ordering device, and ideally it should be just and fair, and everybody should be equal under the law. But that's not entirely true. So we have different ways in which we organize our societies. One is the state is organizing top-down what we can or cannot do through criminal laws, regulatory law. To some extent, we also have bottom-up rights as citizens. We might have rights to our property, rights to freedom of speech, which we can invoke against the state. But what people don't talk about so much are the institutions of private law that are critical for our capitalist economy as we know them. And the institutions of private law, like property right, security or collateral law, trust, the common law trust, corporate law, contract law, but also bankruptcy law, are parts of our legal system and are critical for creating the kind of system that we have. So if I come back to your metaphor about medicine, I think these institutions of private law have become addictive drugs for the holders of capital assets, and they don't want to let go. But we also have to understand them, because so in the book that you mentioned that I wrote, which is called The Code of Capital, how the law creates wealth and inequality. So we are supposed to be all equal before the law, but I'm saying actually the law creates inequality. Well, how does it do that? It basically affords some better protections than others. And that's part maybe of any kind of social order, that some have some stronger rights and some have weaker rights. But the question really is, who has access to this legal ordering? Who can do that? And what I'm basically saying is that the kind of institutions that we have created over the last 300-400 years, we have used them to code different types of assets as capital for the benefit of their holders. If you have some resources and you have some really good lawyers, you can code your assets as capital.
Okay.
So let me bring this back to the discussion that when we talked about executive pay and things like that. We're talking about mostly about corporations, right? Corporations are legal entities.
Yes.
So we make, these are artificial creatures of our law. So
Okay.
there's a legal entity, which is enormously beneficial for the shareholders, because the shareholders can hold their shares. And they benefit from limited liability. So they never have to pay more money into the corporation than they did when they invested. So they know exactly what they can lose. They're hoping, of course, for the upside, right? Then the corporation sort of, you appoint a management, you have some directors, etc. The corporation starts running. If the corporation pollutes, right, do the shareholders have to pay in? No. The limited liability is basically a license to externalize the cost of what the corporation is doing to the rest of the world, right? If the corporation becomes insolvent, maybe it's subject to some claims because it polluted the environment. If the corporation becomes insolvent, yes, the corporation might go into bankruptcy and we will liquidate it. The shareholders won't suffer, right? They might have lost their initial investment. Very often they made a lot of money in between, so not really losing anything. Losers are very often, again, employees, and they're losers because we have structured bankruptcy law in a certain way. They're typically among the unsecured creditors, those who always suffer a haircut in bankruptcy. So they might lose not only their past payments that they didn't receive, they might lose their pension rights and all the rest, whereas the secured creditors who lent to the company in the hope that they could also get short-term returns, even if they understood some of the risks, right, will be treated above them. So we have quite consciously created a system that benefit the holders of capital assets. We have created capital assets for those who can make the most money. And there are certain, reasons why we want to do this, but we also have to see the dark side of doing that. You can't really say that we live in a market economy where market forces allocate risk if we're basically protecting those who make most money of the corporations from any risk for things that we really care about and increasingly care about, like the environment.
I want to share, I said 4 physical newspapers. One newspaper was bought over by a new entity. The first thing they did was a very short notice to ask all the employees to go, right? And then there comes the issue in the public who maybe do not really know the full nitty-gritty of the law. And how could that be? People who have contributed their lives to building that particular corporation, and yet when the first sign of trouble, when ownership changes hand, and then they were asked to go. And it's like, what protection do they have? And shouldn't the contribution of the many who helped make that corporation successful for quite a while be taken into consideration? When I benchmark that against the discussion on executive pay, when before it was maybe 20 to 30 base compared to the lowest salaried worker in the corporation, and now 150, some say 200.
Oh, in the US up to 700.
700.
Up to 700. So there's a scale, right? But on the top you have 758 or sometimes the average blue-collar worker. Yes.
So what can the move initiated by WEF or World Economic Forum on stakeholder capitalism when it comes to this area do?
Yeah. I'm not sure how much they can do here, but let me just reinforce what you just said. We were together on this executive pay session, and one of the members in the audience said, we have so much cash sitting in these corporations that it makes perfect sense to give shareholders the money back in the form of share repurchases, which have been very prevalent in the United States. And so that's just, decent management. And taking your example, for decades we have stripped the cost of labor. Right? Always said, we have to do this so the company becomes competitive, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a situation where the companies now are so flush of cash, and then they pay this back to the shareholders rather than making a commitment to the employees. And of course we're seeing this increasingly because The employees don't have a strong bargaining power. Companies can switch countries, they can find workforce elsewhere, right? They can, the artificial intelligence is coming, they can sort of cut back many of the, so the employees have a bad bargaining power. They've always had a bad bargaining power. They have a particularly bad one today. So this is again where we have a major market failure, I would say. In contexts where companies are being bought by other companies, we've seen this quite regularly, of course, for decades and decades, that employees are costs that are being saved immediately. And then the question is, how do you fight back with that? I think there could be different ways. One is you could limit the ability of companies to just fire employees at will, even in major incidences, when you have a takeover, or you bring a voice of employees into the boardroom, right? That's sort of the German model with co-determination. It's also not, they're never as strong as the shareholders are, but they at least participate in the conversation, and they can bargain over at least a transition period that makes it easier for employees to find new jobs if they have to.
The board is very powerful in any public listed company, for example. The executive will listen to the board, and like in Germany that you said, if there's a representation, at least it's there. However, if I was to understand the concept of stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism, which is why the board is there in the first place, the board won't, be punished by any system, for example, if they use up the whole of clean water in one area and they didn't pollute, but they use it up. And if we were talking about moving from shareholder to stakeholder, planting 1 trillion trees in 10 years and all this stuff, I do not see the impetus of making the corporation do so, other than we are at their mercy to decide to do so. But the crisis that we're having at 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees rise in temperature, we must make everybody abide by this because it's already a crisis. So why is it so difficult to, the powers that be of the world unite, for example, like a United Nations thing, and corporation from now on must do this because the world is burning. I mean, that's an utopian idealistic idea, but going towards it is at least good. But what hope is there when the system, as you say, and the law is, heavily on their side?
Yes. So I think, there is hope because, as I said, capital is coded in law. So if we recode it, then behavior would change, but we would have to recode, and for that we need political will. And that's difficult to come by. But you're absolutely right, in the structure that we currently have, the board will listen to the shareholders. It will not listen to anybody else. And even if you put some employees onto the board, given the bargaining power that the employees have relative to the shareholders, that won't make much of a difference. It might make a little bit of a difference, but will not structurally change the system, which I come back to my maybe crazy and radical idea. But when you think about clean water, so a company pollutes. Suppose the company not only the company would be liable for that can happen. Suppose the shareholders would be liable for that. Right?
Not just the executive.
That changes the equation. Because then the shareholders need a board and they need management that protect them from that liability. That's why I'm saying strip companies, especially polluting companies, from limited liability for that kind of action. Maybe you want to protect them still for contractual liability because the other side knows it's a corporation. For tort, for kind of damages done to others, they never ever had an opportunity to bargain with the company about the conditions. The environment never had an opportunity to bargain with corporations at what cost they could exploit them and damage them. So I'm basically saying we have to create this incentive structure. We have to change this incentive structure fundamentally, and then things will fall in place. So I was just at the World Economic Outlook when Secretary Mnuchin of the United States, the Treasury Secretary, was saying, we don't have certainty about risk. Now that's a funny thing to say, right? Risk shouldn't be certain. We don't have certainty about risk, so we shouldn't do anything because things might change. Well, markets are supposedly there to allocate risk and to price risk. the markets cannot price risk as long as the investors don't have to bear the risk. It's very simple.
Understood. I'm just going to go off a bit. I've been waiting for 12 years to meet somebody like you to ask this question on the subprime crisis. I mean, for the movement of capital and money and finance, that not only caused trouble from where it originated from, but bankrupted other countries, like Iceland, made the famous sovereign wealth fund of Singapore lose billions in their investment,
Yes.
but no one is held accountable. I mean, the way I understand it from a layman perspective, the reason is deemed as subprime because they're not the prime candidates eligible for loans. So if you give loans to people who you know are not being able to pay it back, and then you give multiple loans to the same person, and then you come up with derivatives of CDS or CDOs, and then sell it as another financial instrument to other papers. So when that hit our side of the world, there was a discussion and debate that were running around about real economy and artificial economy or Wall Street or whatever it is. Can I get your wisdom on the things that we talk about was one, but when we have this huge amount of money, in the billions and trillions, and we have like a casino capitalism kind of thing.
So what you're describing is actually a period in which we've seen how private actors can actually create their own capital or mint their own wealth, right? So I would put the emphasis not so much on subprime,
Okay.
but on the structures, structured finance,
Okay.
securitization and derivatives that was used to create new assets that could be sold to investors. So there are always two sides of the coin,
Okay.
right? There are the homeowners who
Yes.
need a home.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning, the government-sponsored entities in the United States securitized the mortgages that the private sector originated. At some point, the private sector took over securitization because they realized that they could create new assets which they could sell for profit on the market.
Okay.
That's when the market went out of whack.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden you had homeowners, and you knew that the government would not let all homeowners go down at the same time. Again, we have a major market distortion.
Yes.
We had some explicit guarantee, we had a huge implicit guarantee from the government. Against that, the private sector started to push more and more assets out into the market and sell them around the world. And then you basically structure them in law so that the rating agencies give you the right ratings that you need, so you can sell them to pension funds, you can sell them to different investors. Only that way this works. So I have a chapter on this in my book as well, so you can really, when you look through the chain from the homeowners to the originators and then sort of creating the securitization structure and putting derivatives on top of that, at every step in the way there are corporate entities, financial intermediaries that can make money off that.
Yeah.
And when the whole thing collapses, the put option for the government is so big that the government has no choice but to step in and bail out the sector. So again, I think this is not a market economy. That's not taking real risks.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically creating a huge put option for the government and insuring yourself by doing so. And so I think the flaw is not the subprime homeowner. If people are knocking at your door every day and giving you another mortgage, you'll take it eventually. I don't blame them.
What's the perspective of law? Because is that a crime? Is that not a crime?
No. So this is, no, there were no crimes, and because I think, the law, when you look through the legal documentation that was used, the prospectuses that were written on the securitization, I do this with my students. So when you look at the prospectus in the 1970s, they were like 6 to maximal 6 pages, or sort of a list of risk factors, but not that many, just a handful of risk factors that they disclosed to the investors. When you look at the prospectus in 2006, you have 65 risk warnings. So the lawyers, every time they updated their prospectus, put more risk warnings into them for the investors who never read the prospectus. But by writing these risk warnings into the prospectus, they protected their own clients, the issuers, from any civil liability. Now, did they violate any criminal law? No, they disclosed everything. There's no fraud when you disclose everything. The investors didn't read it because they went only by the rating. Yes. And then you go after the rating agencies, and in the United States, even today, they still benefit to a large extent from saying we were just giving an opinion, we should be protected by free speech. So
actually-
the rating agencies are saying they're like your newspaper organization, and they have the benefit of free speech and therefore should not be held liable either.
The reason I asked that, because I was wishing that you were also in the press conference for the Corruption Perception Index, because I directly asked, because Malaysia had the episode of 1MDB, and the DOJ in America had a press conference, and the whole world knows about it now. We find it's not that easy to close the chapter on that because of the huge web that goes around the world across many financial systems and stuff. But the point is, for a company like Goldman Sachs to carry that transaction,
Yes.
because of that huge amount, surely due diligence dictates that you check the validity, you see where it's coming from, and surely they could see some telltale warning signs. And is this the case? Because we're talking about executive pay. If a payout for me to take this job is 600 million, let's say, I mean, I could take that risk, even though I know there's something of a red flag.
Of course, exactly right. I mean, so I think, I find this kind of striking, the justifications that are given for the golden handshakes and other executive compensation packages when you leave a company, because they are taking so much risk. We should ask, how much risk are you taking when you already get such a fat pay check anyhow? Yes. And you already know that you will be insured on the downside, even if you do something horrible. I mean, think about Boeing, right? Yeah. How much the CEO now got when he walked away from the company after what happened with the Maxes that killed so many people in Malaysia and in other parts of the world as well. So we're insuring the executives from any real risk. They have no risk. I mean, you can retire on the payout that you get when you leave. And so I think the incentive structures are fundamentally wrong.
I'm just going to go out to the financial reporting side of the corporate market, because every time there's an annual general meeting, every time there's a financial report out, the media has been trained to report all this. And now the World Economic Forum is saying that instead of just looking at that profit bottom line, include ESG, into it. And I'm arguing at the CPI discussion or press conference, if you do not put the corruption metrics right there, I mean, like the ratings agencies and the Goldman Sachs, I only look at the laws that we have now, and they have done that part. Yeah. What about the inequality that will happen and we know is coming? Who's going to take the brunt of that? It's always coming back to the local grassroots that would have to pay again and again.
Yes, and I think unfortunately you're right. I think given the system that we have, I think those that have enough resources and very good lawyers, they can make sure that most of the moves that they're taking are actually legal, right? For them, it's really critical that these things are legal. This comes back to the rule of law point at the beginning. We're all saying rule of law, but we also have to see that this has become a powerful instrument to protect powerful players in the system in a way that is really unfair to the periphery. And we do see the tendency that we enforce the law when we allocate cost on the periphery, but we then become rather soft. Yes. At the core, we do bank bailouts, we do other things because we want to protect the system as such. I think there are some deep flaws in the system as it's currently as it currently is, and that have to be rectified if we want to address the big challenges of our time.
I have very small shoulders, so I'm going to leverage on yours, which is why there is stature in law, especially in closing of this discussion. Then what hope is there? One of the reasons I fought so hard to be here at the World Economic Forum, because I thought bringing the voices of areas of the world like mine matters here, because otherwise we'll be out of sight and out of mind. And then the secondary reason is to bring whatever great people here, great discussions back home. But like in the case of IMDb, if the case is long drawn, if the results and verdicts of the courts doesn't go this way that people think it should go, then it will create that trust deficit even more of the people to the justice system, to the international prosperity and shared prosperity, as we like to call it in Malaysia. So in closing, what hope can you give us for a small country like us, faced with international conspiracy of billions, for example, and they could hit any country or any community? What can a small country, not a big force of Wall Street, do to at least have a semblance of hope against all this?
Well, I think on your own, it's going to be difficult, but I think there are many coalition partners around the world, and not only different countries, but also different coalitions and advocates in different countries. I think there's a growing groundswell, even in the United States, of people who really want to see real change. Whether or not we can materialize on that depends on many factors that are difficult to control, but I think there are these coalition partners. There's a lot of interesting, fresh thinking that is coming out, and I think what we would really need is not a World Economic Forum where the world leaders come, but where those come who want to have real change and need change, and are advocates for those who want to change the world to make it just survivable. It's not even, we're not even at a stage where we can say we make it equal and good for everybody. We just need to survive as humanity on this planet, and I don't think we can do this under the system that we currently have.
Would having better law education incorporating all this change the equation?
No, we haven't done that yet, so I'm pushing for more of that, but there's so much you can do. Yes.
Thank you so much, Professor Pistor, for making time.
Thank you for having me.
There's a lot more things. Hopefully we'll see you next year's WEF or in any other avenue around the world. If not, we're just going to Skype to you.
Okay.
I'm just going to say goodbye to the audience. Thank you for staying in this discussion. This is a special recording of Agenda AWANI right here at the World Economic Forum 2020. It's easy to say shared prosperity or shareholder capitalism, but how do we secure it is the matter. And hopefully this discussion has given you some pointers. Good night and goodbye. Thank you so much.